are in Revelation, the 20th chapter. Revelation, the 20th chapter. And fortunately, we are out of the hard verses. Okay, woo, I'm glad. Out of the hard verses, aren't you? I say that, and I'm going to show you some things tonight that make the rest of them hard. You can't make Revelation easy. It has to be hard. In the Revelation 20, Satan is bound for how long? 1,000 years, right? We said that 1,000 years represents just a long period of time. It is not a literal, definite 1,000-year period. And then John comes along and he says that at the end of that 1,000 years, what's going to happen? Satan is loosed. And he's going to be loosed for a little season. And when he gets out and he's loosed, he uses a different tactic than he had been using upon the world prior to the fall of the city of Jerusalem. What was he using against the church prior to the fall of Jerusalem? What was his main weaponry against the church? Yeah, physical persecution. And it was done by both the Jews and the Romans, was it not? Both groups were involved in the process. In fact, the Jews were extremely loyal to whom? To the Roman Empire. Okay, remember one of the Jews during the one of the scenes with Jesus says, we have no king but Caesar. And right there, they announced their loyalty to the Roman throne. Even though they hated Rome, they still were very loyal to them. And who was it that put the high priest in place in the Jewish empire? Yeah, Caesar did. And most of the time it was the Sadducees. They were the aristocrats. They were the rich folks. And so they had an alignment with Caesar. So the Jews and the Romans worked together a lot during those first few years of the church, from AD 33 until the fall of the city of Jerusalem. Okay, and then after the fall of Jerusalem, what's happened to Judaism? Yeah, what? Okay, basically, Judaism was a fallen religion, was it not? Can you imagine what a Jew felt like about AD 73? Okay. Can you imagine what a priest in the Jewish religion felt like in AD 73 after the fall of the city of Jerusalem, after the destruction of the temple, after there was no longer a place for there to be any sacrifices, after they could no longer prove their Jewish heritage because all the records were destroyed, their city was in shambles, and it's the capital city, is it not? And the place of worship is totally gone. The place where the presence of God is located is totally gone, and now you're a Jew. I would have loved to have been a Jew from about AD 73 till about AD 90 or so. I'd just like to have seen how they functioned as a religion during that particular time, because it had to be a difficult time. So after the fall of Jerusalem, Satan now uses another tactic, does he not? And we talked about that tactic at the end of our lesson last week. What is the major tactic that he's going to use? Okay, yes. Deceit, okay, false doctrines, and also idolatry. Those are going to be the things that he uses. False doctrine, which is deceit, is it not? Anything that's false goes against truth, that's deceitful. And also the practice of idolatry. And so that's what he's going to attack the world with. And notice we ended in verse 7. And now we're in verse 8. He says this, "And he shall go out to deceive the nations." And that's where we talked about his deception of the nations through these heathen gods and teachings. Now notice what he says, "which are in" where? The four corners of the earth. What he's talking about there is that Satan's influence is going to be what? Worldwide. The four corners of the earth represents the entirety of the world. Has Satan done a masterful job deceiving the world? I just heard the other day on the radio that we just passed the 8 billion mark in population. Okay, 8 billion. Is that a lot of people? Yeah, it'd be hard to get them in here. Okay, in this building. 8 billion people. And guess how many New Testament Christians there are? About 3 to 5 million. Now you go home tonight and you divide 3 million by 8 billion, and you'll get the percentage of individuals who are true Christians on the earth today. Guys, let me tell you what. It is a smidgen of a percent. Okay? And the word smidgen doesn't even do it justice. And you want to know who holds captive the rest of the world? Satan does. And you want to know how he does it? Through massive deception. Does he not? Does he still use idolatry? Oh yes. The idolatry just takes different forms, doesn't it? Individuals don't build temples to their gods very often. Some nations that is still practiced, but not as often. But there's still the gods that are in this world. The God of self, the God of money, the God of materialism, the God of pleasure, the God of recreation. There's all kinds of gods that individuals serve today. And Satan has deceived the entirety of the world. Now notice the names by which he calls this deception. Gog and Magog, to gather them together for what? To battle. Before we get into Gog and Magog, I want you just to underline the little word battle. Okay? Battle. When you and I think of war, most of the time our minds immediately go to physical warfare, doesn't it? Okay? The very minute you mention war, you think of guns, you think of soldiers and armies and generals and tanks and bombs and explosions and guns of all kinds and killing. That's what our mind goes to. And very seldom when we hear the word war do we think spiritually. Well, guess what? Satan is a spiritual being, is he not? He is a spirit being. And yes, he uses this world for his evil, but guess what? He is a spiritual being. When he thinks in terms of battle, when he thinks in terms of warfare, he's not thinking physical battle. He's thinking what? Spiritual battle for the souls of men and women every hour of every day. The Bible tells us that Satan was loosed for a little season, that he may deceive the nations on the four corners of the earth. To do what? To do battle with them. We need to understand that Satan is serious about this warfare. You know that? It's not a game to him. It's not just a Sunday deal. It is an everyday battle for every soul on the face of the earth. And it is war. And he's going to fight it until he gets destroyed. Now notice though the names, Gog and Magog. I think I said last week that when individuals hear those names, they kind of perk up, don't they? And that's when they start attaching all the sci-fi stuff to the book of Revelation. Okay? And they never just stop and try to understand these names and where they come from and why these particular names are chosen. True or false? A lot of the imagery in the book of Revelation is also found in the Old Testament. That's true. Okay? And if you're writing to Jews, right, about the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, and these Jews have been trained well in Judaism, when they hear all of these images and they hear all of these numbers and they see all of these pictures, guess where their minds go back to? They go back to those images and what they meant in the Old Testament. Okay? And so when here's a Jew, maybe a Christian Jew, who's reading the book of Revelation, and all of a sudden he reads about Gog and who? Magog. Guys, those names to him are not foreign. Okay? They're not foreign. He knows those names were used in the Old Testament. And He knows exactly where those names belong. Go back to Genesis chapter 10. How many sons did Noah have? Ooh, I'm glad we got it. Three sons. Remember, there was 8 souls in the ark, right? Noah and his wife, his 3 sons and their wives. 8 souls in the ark. Does anybody know, this is where it gets complicated, the names of those 3 boys? Shem, Ham, and who? Japheth. All right? Only one of those sons was responsible for the righteous in the world. Which son? Shem. Okay? From the lineage of Shem, the righteous came into the world. That means the other 2 sons were responsible for what? For the wickedness and the evil that is in the world. Okay? We have one of his sons by the name of Japheth. And he had a list of sons. Listen to it in Genesis 10 verse 2. Gomer and who? Magog. Uh-oh. I think I heard that name in Revelation a while ago. Didn't you? You see, the Jew knew. Genesis 10:2. Now, they didn't know 10:2 because the verses and chapters hadn't been developed then. But they knew. Wow, that's one of the sons of who? That's one of the sons of Japheth, the son of Noah. He goes on and lists several other names: Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. Now watch this, Genesis 10, verse 5. Japheth's lineage was responsible, watch it, for the isles of who? The Gentiles. And he says that right in the biblical text. This family is responsible for the isles of the Gentiles. Question: did the Gentiles stand in opposition to Jews in the first century? Yeah. Isn't that something? And one of the sons of Japheth was named what? Magog. And somehow, some way, Magog's name got attached to who? The Gentile world, who stood in opposition to whom? Stood in opposition to the Jewish nation. Now, we have very little information about Magog. Okay? So here's something you need to write down in your book of questions for heaven when you get there. Okay? You need to walk up to God or Jesus or somebody and say, hey, explain to me this Magog guy. I know that he's partly responsible for the Isle of the Gentiles. I know that the Gentiles are wicked and evil and that they were corrupt, that they were far from God, they were strangers to the covenants of promise for a long, long time. But why did you choose Magog's name to represent that group of people? I bet you if we understood all the history behind Magog, we'd have some interesting reading, wouldn't we? Okay, so that's where Magog comes from. Now, we jump a little bit further into the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 38:2. Watch this. Gog, okay, remember the 2 names in Revelation are who? Gog and Magog. In the book of Revelation, Ezekiel, Gog is the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal who led, watch this, an invasion in Israel. They too are what? Enemies of God. Gog and Magog, those 2 names in the mind of a Jew would immediately represent enemies of God's people. Gentiles and a man who led an invasion into where? Into Judah. So the names represent what? Opposition to God and opposition to God's people. And that's all that it stands for. Can you and I be a Gog or a Magog? Yes. Can we be an Antichrist? Oh, yes. Even we could be Antichrists today. And so those names represent concepts. and represent groups of kinds of people. And so, through Gog and Magog, the enemies of God's people, Satan is going to do what? Deceive the nations of the world. And a Jew would have no problem, even a New Testament Christian who studied the Old Testament, they'd have no problems understanding those names. Okay? Questions or comments?
What was the isles that you talked about before that?
Well, they lived, just the different tribes, the different places where they lived throughout the entirety of the world. They just call them Isles of the Gentiles. Well, part of them were, you take for instance the Philistines, they had their beginning on the Isle of Crete. Okay, so, but it's just where those individuals are. Before we skip to the next verse, look at that last, let me make one more point. I told you about Satan in this battle. Here's what I wrote in my notes. He sees the battle against God and God's people as war. He fights. He fights believing that all is fair in war. He fights to destroy. He fights to kill. That's Satan's mindset. Okay? And you and I, we get up to be what? To be good. Don't we? That's what we get up to be. We get up to be good. I want to be nice. I want to be kind. I want to be positive. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to even offend somebody. Right? That's the kind of people we are. Guys, that is not Satan. Okay? That is not Satan at all. He is out to destroy us. Now notice this next part. To gather them to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. A while ago I made the contrast, didn't I? 8 billion people on the earth. 3 to 5 million Christians. Folks, those individuals who are in opposition to our God are like the sand of the sea, are they not? That is a lot of people. And that's just people who are living right now. Think about how long it's been since these things were written. We got a 2,000-year history of individuals who have lived on this earth and died being in opposition to God. When God talks about how many enemies He's had throughout the years and that they're like the sand of the sea, that's a lot of people. A lot of people. Questions, comments, anybody? Before we go to that next verse? Uh-oh, one question.
I just had to do that. It comes out to something like 1/300,000th of 1%.
1/300,000th of 1%. We don't even make up 1% of the world's population as Christians. Many are called, but few are chosen. Enter ye in at the strait gate. Because wide is the gate and broad is the way which leadeth unto destruction. And many there be which go in thereat, but strait is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life. And few, that little word few, folks, means few. Few there be that find it. How many were saved in the days of Noah? We've already told that. 8. 8 souls in the days of Noah. Go back and look at the world's population and how big it probably was, and there were a lot of people on the earth at the time. And only 8 were saved in the flood. Unbelievable. Oh man, absolutely. Notice Revelation 20, verse 9. And they, who is that? Gog and Magog, the enemies of God's people, and they went up on the breadth of the earth. Now listen to this. And compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. Uh-oh. Through this whole discussion, from Revelation 1 all the way to Revelation 20, what have we been talking about? The fall of Jerusalem. And that Jerusalem has been destroyed, Jerusalem has been wiped out, the temple has been annihilated, and now all of a sudden, Gog and Magog arise go out to deceive all the world, and they do battle against who? The camp of the saints. Remember, that's a battle term, okay? The camp of the saints and who? The beloved city. Man. Somebody turn over to Galatians 4, verse 26. We'll come back to this camp of the saints in just a second. Let's talk about this beloved city. Galatians 4, somebody read 26.
And because you are sons, God hath sent forth the Spirit of His Son.
Is that Galatians 4, 26?
But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all.
Go back tonight and study the allegory that Paul sets forth in this particular passage. Okay? But the interesting thing that he tells the Christians of the churches of Galatia is this. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. Folks, the church is the new Jerusalem. Okay? The church is the spiritual Jerusalem. Oh yes, physical Jerusalem had been totally annihilated, had it not? It had been destroyed by the Roman armies marching against the city. But there was another Jerusalem, spiritual Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem that still existed. And guess what Satan did? He set up warriors around what? Around the beloved city. You think Satan loves the church? Satan despises the church. We are the called out ones, are we not? We've been called out of the world. We're not on the side of Satan. We are no longer sinners. We are, I hope you say it, saints. You know, a lot of people don't like saying that. Okay, I'm no saint. Okay, well, that means you're going to die and go to hell if you ain't. Okay. You know, there's a big distinction in the New Testament between sinners and saints. And when you and I become Christians, we quit being sinners and we become what? Saints. Can we sin? Yes, but we are no longer living that kind of a life anymore. And we've been redeemed by the precious blood of Jesus. We're saints. We're holy ones, aren't we? The called out ones from the world. We are the new Jerusalem. So Satan, he sends out his forces again to deceive the nation. And whose camp does he come around? The camp of the saints. Whose city does he get around? The beloved city, the new Jerusalem. Let's go back to that little word saints, since we talked about it. Does anybody know what the Greek word means from which we get the word saints? There's about 3 different words that are New Testament words that come from the same Greek word, and one of them is saints. Do you know the other 2? What is it? Sanctified is one of them. Okay. Does anybody know the other? No. Holy. Those 3 words come from exactly the same Greek root word. Okay. When we say that we are saints, what we are saying is we are holy and we are sanctified. Okay. We are saints, we are holy, we are sanctified. And there's 3 aspects of being a saint. Okay? Number 1, saints have been purified. Okay? What cleansed us? Yes, baptism, which involved the washing of water by the Word. It also involved the washing of away of our sins through the precious blood of Jesus, doesn't it? So we've been cleansed. We've been purified. We don't have all that sin and dirt and filth on us anymore. So that's the first part of being a saint. What's the second part? It comes from the word sanctified. We are set apart. When you and I became Christians, where did God put us? Did He just leave us in the world? No. We talked about that Sunday, didn't we? You know, we asked the question, am I saved? In our first lesson. And there's only 2 groups of people as far as God is concerned in the world. The world and the church. But the church has been called out of the world. Colossians 1 verse 13 says what? Colossians 1:13. I thought somebody just quoted for me. Who hath delivered us out of the power of darkness, and hath translated us into the kingdom of His dear Son. Wow. We've been translated, folks. That little word translated means to be moved. Anybody ever used to watch the old Star Trek movies? Okay. You could beam them down, and you could do what? Beam them up. The one that you always heard was what? Beam me up, Scotty, because something bad was going on down on wherever they were. Well, folks, we've been, guess what? We've been beamed to a different place. We've been translated to a different place. God took us out of the world. He set us apart. And He does not look upon us like He looks at those in the world. But there's a third part of this idea of sainthood, and it's this. We've been set apart, not just to sit over here and do nothing. We've been set apart for a holy purpose unto God. Okay? Was the temple holy in the Old Testament? Did it serve a purpose? Oh yes, it served a purpose. And guess what? We are the temple of God today. We are holy, and guess what we do? We're supposed to serve a purpose unto God. And here, Satan is working against who? He's working against the camp of the saints. Wow. Questions? Comments? None? It's good stuff, guys. But notice the next part, the end of verse 9. And fire came down from heaven, and what? Devoured them. Devoured who? Gog and Magog, didn't he? The enemies of God's people. Here are individuals fighting against the saints. Here are individuals fighting against the church, the New Jerusalem, the beloved city. And God says, oh no. Oh no. You too will find your end, won't you? And He sends down fire to destroy them. Wow. That little word devoured. Anybody remember what it means? We've looked at it before. Huh? Man, he's been reading his lexicon this afternoon. Strong says this, to eat down. Thayer says to consume by eating, to devour. When you think of a fire, does it eat things? That's what they oftentimes say. Okay, when you talk to firefighters and stuff, they'll use that term, okay, that the fire just ate up everything in its path. Okay, and so God uses that terminology in this idea of devour. It just eats up everything that's in front of it. To devour, to destroy. God simply tells us that even though Satan is loosed again, and he has allies fighting for his cause, using the means of deception, what's going to happen to them? They too will end in defeat. Guys, you don't win against God. Okay? You don't win against God. And here's another wonderful thought for us. God is on our side, isn't He? Now remember, the enemies are going against His saints. The enemies are going against the beloved city. And yet, it's God who saves them and devours Gog and Magog. God is on our side. If that don't make you feel good, you got a problem with your feeler. Okay? And you and I need to, rest in that thought that God will fight for us. Now notice the next verse. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. We see the devil's ultimate what? His ultimate end, don't we? Cast into the fire, or into the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. Brother West makes an interesting statement. The point being made here is Satan, using forces of the sea beast, the land beast, and the false prophets, as well as Gog and Magog, was unable to destroy the King, the risen Savior. Satan cannot win this war against God. It's impossible. Where's he going to be cast? Into the lake of fire and brimstone. Turn over to Matthew. Somebody read 25, chapter 25, verse 41. We have a judgment scene in chapter 25. All nations are gathered around the throne of God in Matthew 25. There's some on his left hand, there's some on his right hand, and he's speaking now to those on the left hand. And what does he say?
Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, is it everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels.
Man. The lake of fire and brimstone was never designed for human beings. Okay? Now, why do I say that? I say that because the death of Jesus was for who? The entirety of the world. For all men, wasn't it? For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. You see, God gave a means, a way, whereby every human being on the face of the earth could be saved. And so God never intended for any human being to be cast into the lake of fire. He wants all men to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. He prepared the lake of fire and brimstone for who? The devil and his angels. That's who that lake was really prepared for. But what he found was what? Not all men will accept him. Not all men will benefit from the atoning death of Jesus Christ. And they side with who? They side with Satan. They side with the evil one. And so that's their end as well. But hell was prepared for the devil and his angels. I wrote down these things from this verse. Number one, it is a horrible end. I think I'd like to die in any way except fire. Wouldn't you? I just don't know that I want my body to feel fire. Okay? Secondly, it's an end with a stench, isn't it? Fire and what? Brimstone. It's got the reek smell of sulfur that is constantly in the air. I don't know about you, that stinks. Okay? The minute you pass by somewhere where you smell a little sulfur, that is one nasty smell. I've never seen a crowd of people standing around going, ooh, this is nice. Have you? You know, I've just never seen that. It's a painful end, isn't it? They shall be what? Tormented, he says. It's a painful end. And it's an eternal end. Forever and ever. I find it interesting, and we talked about this on one occasion. Is forever forever? You know, the word forever is forever. But it's interesting in Scripture oftentimes, he'll say forever and ever. To emphasize that forever is what? Eternity. You see, even in our minds, we have a tendency to put eternity into a time frame. Did you know that? Yeah. We'll be there throughout eternity. Throughout, it sounds like it's going to come to an end, doesn't it?
And the
No.
world thinks it's going to be you'll be there with your friends, and you'll be having a good time. You know, everything will be, I'll just be with who I'm with now.
It's for them. That's what it is. You know, everybody goes there, don't they?
Right.
That little word tormented. Listen to this definition: to torture. That's what it literally means. To torture. Thayer says to vex with grievous pains, to torment. Vine says it means to torture, torment, distress, and then he uses this word: to toil. To toil. Once you're there, there is no relief. Remember when the Christian dies and goes to heaven, he gets something called R-E-S-T, doesn't he? He gets rest. Folks, you die and go to hell, there is no rest. You think you're tired now? You ain't felt tired. Okay? There is no relief. There is torment and torture and distress and agony and toil and pain forever. Man. God finally takes vengeance upon the enemies of His people. He does so in His time. But when He brings it to pass, it involves an ultimate end, doesn't it? Listen to Hebrews 10:30. For we know Him that hath said, Vengeance belongeth unto me. I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge His people. We whine and we cry because people do us bad, do us dirty, and we think sometimes we just need to get vengeance on them. Guys, just chill. Take a chill pill, okay? Because one of these days, God will rectify every wrong on the face of the earth. And we just need to sit back and let God take care of the injustices that are in the world, don't we? Especially those that we have absolutely no control over whatsoever. Man, questions or comments? You know what that means? I keep telling you, if there's no questions, no comments, I've taught this class perfectly, and you understand everything. And if I gave you a test next week, you'd all make hundreds. That's what that means, okay? So gear up. Revelation 20:11. And I saw. Oh, poor John. He's still doing what? He's still seeing things, okay? Every time you turn around, he puts, and I saw. I cannot imagine being John on the Isle of Patmos. All of a sudden, in chapter 1, he says, and I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. He knew, I'm inspired. That's something that's interesting to me. Those men knew the very moment they were inspired of God. And then, for the next 22 chapters, all he's doing is what? Seeing things, isn't he? Does he see some crazy things? Wonderful things, marvelous things, concerning things, troubling things? Man. And we're in chapter 20, and it hasn't stopped yet. And I saw. Wow. But this time he sees something very interesting. And I saw a great white throne, and Him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was no place found for them. Man. Interesting statement, isn't it? After the judgment of Satan, right? Previous verse, where had Satan been put? In the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. After the judgment of Satan, what happens then? That's the question, isn't it? What happens then? Now, if God is giving us a glimpse into eternal judgment, I find this interesting. Satan is the first one gone, isn't it? Isn't that interesting? He doesn't get to stay at the judgment and gloat over all the people that he got to turn against God, not obey the God. He doesn't get to do that. He's the first one that's pitched where? Pitched in the lake. And you know what he's going to say? Uh-oh. No, the reality is he already knows his end, doesn't he? Does Satan know his end? If he knows the Bible, he knows his end. But how do you know he knows? Do you remember when Jesus walked the earth and individuals would be possessed with demons? And Jesus would walk up, and sometimes the demon in that individual would speak to Jesus. And they would say this, Art thou come to torment us before the time? Uh-oh. Here are these demons who know I'm going to be judged, and I'm going to be condemned, and I'm going to be tormented in a devil's hell. Wow. They know. They know. John focuses on the answer to that question. After Satan is judged, what then? In these next few verses. Okay? Now, when you're reading the commentaries, and I just want to point this out to you, when you're reading the commentaries, you're going to see some individuals who see this as a very, as final judgment. Okay? And most of the time when you ever hear these passages quoted, they're always quoted as what? Final judgment, aren't they? But remember we said that many individuals believe that the book of Revelation has to do with the fall of the city of Jerusalem, right? And so these individuals make it applicable to those individuals who had been on the side of Satan in the first century. And I'll talk about it just a little bit. I just want you to know that if you're reading some of the commentaries that I've suggested, you'll read that particular interpretation placed on these verses. Yes, it sounds like final judgment because what he does is he places the picture of final judgment upon those individuals after the fall of Jerusalem. Was the fall of Jerusalem a type of the end of the world? Yes. It's referred to as the coming of Jesus. Okay? It's one of the comings of Jesus. And it is a judgment against God's adversaries. And it is, it was the means whereby God's people escaped the wrath of the enemy. Okay? So it was a judgment. And so some think that it's final judgment, that the picture of final judgment, but it's really placed upon those that participated in the things going on in the first century against the church. Okay, so just be aware of that. We'll talk about it a little bit more next week. Notice this next point. He brings us into the throne room of God, doesn't he? And I saw a great white throne. Have we been in this throne room before? When? Huh? Okay. Yeah, chapter 4. Chapter 4, John enters right into the throne room. Can you imagine, guys? Here you are, in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and God just takes you right into His throne room. And I saw what? I saw a great white throne, he says. Great. Have we seen other thrones in this book? Just earlier in the chapter. Remember those souls that were under the altar? What were they raised to sit on? Thrones. Well, he doesn't see these thrones. He sees what? A great white throne. A throne that is above all thrones. All thrones pictured in the Revelation. All thrones that men have ever constructed on the face of the earth. Did Solomon build a magnificent throne upon which to sit? Boy, I'd love to have seen that throne, wouldn't you? Gigantic. But God's throne is far superior to that. Oh, man. Let's look at the word white real quick. It indicates purity, holiness, and righteousness. The throne is likened to the one who sits on it. And the judgments and the sentences that are set forth from that throne, guys, guess what? Are just like the individual who sits on it. They are just and holy and righteous. Psalm 89:14 says this, "Justice and judgment are the habitation of thy throne. Mercy and truth shall go before thy face." Folks, when God judges, He always judges right. Always. The great white throne. I want you to ask yourself a question for next week. All the text says is this, "And him that sat on it." I saw a great white throne and him that sat on it. I want you to try to figure out who it was sitting on that throne. We'll talk about that next week. Thank you, thank you.